Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started here. We've detected a quorum. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Appropriations Subcommittee to order on February 7th, 2022. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representatives Campbell, Faison, Garrett, Hazelwood, Hicks of Hawkins, Lamar, Miller, Sexton of Granger, Shaw, Sparks, Zachary, Chairman Williams, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Do any of the members have any personal orders before we get started? I noticed the chairman of transportation is here, Chairman Howell's here. We'd like to thank him for coming. Always a learner, so appreciate you coming today. Just wanted to make the members known and those watching online. The focus of the hearing today is to better understand electric vehicle taxation as it now stands and what challenges electric and hybrid vehicle taxation may happen in the future. We have three departments that we're going to hear from today. Late last week, I believe it was on Thursday, each member received in their email white paper describing the hours of research that Chair Lady Hazelwood and my interns did as it relates to this research regarding what other states have done. The members, that information is on your dashboard as well. They found that other states are making changes as it relates to electric and hybrid vehicle taxation. Some is like we do here as it relates to registration. Some have to do with utility fees and a combination of many other things. But today, to give you an idea, there are 6.5 million registered vehicles in the state of Tennessee. 1.3% of those are either hybrid or electric vehicle. As many of you may know, and Finance met, did I say 1.3 million? No. 1.3% of those are hybrid or electric. As many of the members know, as Representative Shaw knows, Ford has committed to build many new electric vehicles here in the state of Tennessee. So the impact of electric vehicles and gas taxation is one that is going to be at our doorstep in the future, probably quicker than we expect. And so for that purpose, the speakers asked us to have a hearing on this today. I'm going to ask the member first if TDEC wants to come on up. Today, we're going to have presenting for us Ms. Shauna Vasquez. She is representing TDEC. If you will, when you get to the desk, just hit the microphone and for the record, introduce yourselves. We thank you for coming today.
Good afternoon. My name is Shauna Vasquez, and I work for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation's Office of Energy Programs. All right, so thank you for inviting us here today to discuss transportation electrification in Tennessee. As you're aware, TDEC exists to enhance the quality of life for Tennesseans and to be stewards of our natural environment. One of our visions for Tennessee, a vision that is shared by our colleagues in other state agencies, is for the state to become a leader in the electric transportation space. Our departmental leadership has stated that transformational change is underway in Tennessee and that we are emerging as the epicenter of electric vehicle development and advanced manufacturing in the nation. According to the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, nearly $12 billion in capital investment has been accrued in the state since 2017 in the EV sector alone. This reflects the four major automotive manufacturers that currently or soon plan to produce EVs and their associated battery technologies in Tennessee, as well as other vehicle parts and battery producers that have set up shop across the state. TDEC believes that EVs have the potential to make our transportation system both more efficient and more resilient. And so we've been engaged in several EV and charging infrastructure projects to achieve these benefits in Tennessee. This includes providing research and other resources to support the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations during their recent efforts to evaluate EV adoption and its impact on our state's economy, roadways, and infrastructure. It's our understanding that this report is expected to be finalized and released later this year. So throughout 2018, a core team of stakeholders, including state agencies such as TDEC and our counterparts at the Department of Transportation here today, electric utilities, including the Tennessee Valley Authority, local governments, universities, EV manufacturers, businesses, advocacy groups, all worked together to develop a shared vision for electric transportation in Tennessee. Together, these stakeholders comprise the consortium named Drive Electric Tennessee, whose goal is to increase EV adoption in Tennessee from approximately 17,000 EVs today. Keep in mind that is all electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, to 200,000 vehicles by 2028. DET conducted a statewide electric vehicle charging infrastructure needs assessment in late 2019 to evaluate the condition of Tennessee's current EV charging infrastructure and to identify charging needs and potential geographic locations to support increased EV adoption in the future. The needs assessment did conclude that additional EV charging infrastructure was needed on highway corridors to relieve range anxiety and to connect rural and urban areas of the state. Highway corridor charging was identified as the best candidate for public or utility investment, whereas other EV charging use cases like community charging, workplace charging, and residential or multi-unit dwelling charging were identified as good candidates for private or public and private investment based on market attractiveness and anticipated utilization, at least in the first few years. By that same logic, other secondary markets like rural destination charging and limited income community charging were also recommended for public investment. TDEC has used the findings from this needs assessment to design and prioritize several EV charging infrastructure programs for the state, which we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, I did want to take a minute and provide a very basic overview of charging station ownership models. The first being the most straightforward, which is where a host, site host, which is the entity who owns the property where an electric vehicle charging station is placed, also owns and operates the charging station itself. And just so we're all clear for terminology's sake, a charging station is also referred to as electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE, so I might be using that throughout this presentation. Another ownership model involves a partnership between a third party and a site host. So the third party could be an electric utility company, an EVSE vendor or network provider, or possibly even a local government who would own and operate the EVSE, but place it within a site host's property with the site host's permission. Please note that both of these models can be successful and that the selection of one over another is usually determined by funding availability, charging station site attractiveness, and other community needs or interests. In 2021, TDEC and the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, signed an agreement to collaborate and fund a statewide, publicly accessible, light-duty EV fast charging network along both interstates and select U.S. and state highways. With the first round of funding released for application late last year, TDEC and TVA will be supplementing existing public EV fast charging infrastructure to create what we call Fast 50. That means non-proprietary fast chargers are placed no less than 50 miles apart along a given corridor or route. This so-called Fast Charge Tennessee network will add approximately 50 new charging locations along prioritized infrastructure gaps, tripling Tennessee's existing fast charging network. The estimated total project cost is approximately $20 million, split between TDEC, TVA, other potential program partners like the Department of Transportation, and program participant cost share. Eligible applicants for the first round of funding included TVA-served local power companies and other local utilities that distribute electricity in Tennessee, whose service territory is along the prioritized corridor gaps that you can see here. In total, we've received 141 site proposals. That's 53 primary sites that are considered the most attractive, and 88 alternate options in case, for whatever reason, the primary options don't work out. And we received those proposals from 36 local power companies across the state. We plan to make announcements later this spring on the local power companies and proposed sites selected for funding under the Fast Charge TN network. Later rounds of this funding may expand applicant eligibility to include local government entities, private companies, and nonprofits. The network will expand accessibility of critical light-duty EV charging for all Tennesseans and regional travelers. These fast chargers will be available in both high-density markets in urban areas and underserved markets in rural or economically distressed areas of our state. On screen is actually a snapshot of the Fast Charge Corridor Completeness Map, which was designed by TDEC and TVA to help visualize prioritized gaps for the installation of qualifying EV fast charging infrastructure. Also in 2021, TDEC announced a partnership with EV automaker and automotive technology company Rivian to install Rivian Waypoint Level 2 charging stations at Tennessee state parks. The goal is to have charging stations available at all 56 state parks system-wide, depending on the availability of electricity and planned future park upgrades. In addition to overseeing design and installation, Rivian will provide the chargers as well as any necessary utility upgrades associated with the charger installation at no cost to the state or taxpayers. Rivian will also cover all network fees, equipment service, and maintenance for 10 years. The chargers can provide up to 11.5 kilowatts of power, which enables EV drivers to top up on miles while enjoying a day trip or overnight camp. EV charging at Tennessee state parks will initially be free. Any potential future cost to drivers may be dependent on system-wide utilization of the network to recover electricity costs. So moving on to estimated charging station costs, there's a few tables on the screen right now that show estimated costs in a range depending on the type of project we're talking about. And I do want to really hammer in that these are estimates we're looking at. The true cost of an electric vehicle charging station very much depends on the site that you're proposing to place it and its current electricity service levels. Because if there's not a lot of electric service already established in an area, especially for these kind of commercial chargers we've been talking about and for the Fast Charge TN network, the cost can be quite high to prepare the site for that installation. There's really three types of charging infrastructure that we keep in mind in the EV space. The first one being level 1 charging, which isn't even illustrated on this screen because it's quite cheap and accessible. It's a cord that comes with the car. You plug it into a 110, 120 volt outlet. You charge very slowly, around 2 to 5 miles in electric range added per hour. And because of that, it's not anything that the state at this time is planning to invest in. But I just wanted to make you aware that that type of infrastructure is out there. Level 2 charging, on the other hand, is what most EV drivers use for their daily needs. And you can see in the two tables on the left ranges of the types of costs you can expect to see for a level 2 charging station install. This is around 240 volts of power. You gain 20 to 30 miles in electric range per hour. Any EV can use level 2 charging stations, and they're common at the home, workplace, retail sites, other types of public charging where you're expected to be there for a few hours at a time. In the tables that you're seeing, there are different costs associated with networked and non-networked level 2 chargers. Non-networked is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the same as plugging in your vehicle into what is essentially a 240 volt wall outlet designed for the car, but there's no sophisticated tracking or measurement of the electricity that's being dispensed, so it tends to be less expensive. Networked charging, on the other hand, is a little bit more expensive, but it also offers a lot more opportunity to track the actual dispensing of electricity as a transportation fuel, being able to control when the infrastructure is online in case of emergencies or in case of other load management details, and also, most importantly, allows for the collection of fees at the station itself. So that networked charging tends to be more common in public areas where it's more imperative to collect fees associated with the actual infrastructure. DC fast charging on the right, you'll see that the numbers grow pretty substantially, and that's because instead of a small unit that charges at a relatively even pace, DC fast charging is capable of having an electric vehicle regain 80% of its battery charge in under 30 minutes. This is a commercial level of electric dispensing, and you usually find it along a corridor, like in the Fast Charge TN network we were discussing earlier, and allowing for long-distance travel, or also within communities with high EV populations, Nashville being one of them. We have a few of these used for mostly community purposes. TDEC and TVA are requiring fast charging sites funded under the Fast Charge TN Network program to have at least 120 kilowatts in charging capacity for a single vehicle, and for those sites to be non-proprietary, such that all EVs will be able to use them. And please do keep in mind the numbers here. It's a big, long range, like I said, just due to a lot of costs associated with site readiness being pretty variable. The cost you're seeing here is for a fast charge TN site, meaning there's at least 2 stations at one site. So it's not priced per station, it's priced per site overall. And the reason that we require more than 1 station at a site is to future-proof the system and to make sure that there's redundancy. You're not showing up to an EV fast charging site and not able to use it because somebody else is in line and ahead of you. And before we close out today, I just wanted to talk about the actual costs of charging an electric vehicle for the driver. Tennesseans do pay between 10 to 12% per kilowatt hour of electricity, and unlike gasoline and diesel fuel, your kilowatt hour prices are relatively stable over time, which makes it pretty easy to be able to estimate the costs of fueling. To charge from empty, an electric vehicle might consume between 30 to 200 kilowatt hours. I know that that's kind of a staggering range, but the reason it's as large as it is because battery sizes will vary greatly depending on the manufacturer and the vehicle you've purchased, particularly an all-electric vehicle versus a plug-in hybrid. Therefore, an average cost to charge a vehicle from empty is around $3 to $24. It's very rare, though, to recharge a vehicle from empty, just because usually 80 to 90% of charging occurs at the home. So you just pull in, plug in, and then the next morning or later that evening, you have a full vehicle. An average electric vehicle, like the Nissan Leaf, which is made in Smyrna, Tennessee, has a fuel efficiency of around 30 kilowatt hours per 100 miles, and 1 gallon of gasoline is considered equivalent to 33.7 kilowatt hours. Therefore, an average EV can easily achieve a fuel efficiency rating above 100 miles per gallon equivalent. I'll say once again, thank you for inviting TDEC here today to provide information on EVs in Tennessee. Following the successful launch of our Fast Charge TN Network grant program, as well as the continued outreach and engagement provided by our partners at Drive Electric Tennessee and our counterparts at other state agencies, the current level of interest among communities and potential site hosts in adopting EV charging infrastructure is at an all-time high. We have seen continued support and interest from the Tennessee Fuel and Convenience Store Association, Tennessee's electric utility companies, local governments from both urban and rural areas, other private businesses, and more in the continued build-out of EV charging infrastructure across the state. I'm happy now to take any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. The members, we have 2 other folks here, and in order to save time, I think probably the best thing for us to do is to go through all the presentations, and we'll hold the questions till the very end.
Awesome.
My apologies if that's not what you were expecting. Next on the list, we have Department of Revenue. I think Commissioner Giordano and staff are coming. If you will, please take a seat and introduce yourselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Members, once again, as a reminder, all the presentations you're seeing today are on your dashboard if you can't see the screen. Thank you. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation. I'm David Giordano. I'm Commissioner of Revenue. With me at the table is Justin Moorhead, our Chief of Staff, and in the audience we have a number of members of our staff be available later for questions, including leadership from our Vehicle Services Division. As you know, Mr. Chairman, our role is to register these vehicles and also to collect gasoline and motor fuel taxes. And we have a fairly straightforward presentation just covering some numbers from both of those functions. On the first slide, you can see for registration fees, for FY21, the total registration fee revenue was around $359 million. That includes everything. That's passenger motor vehicles, freight motor vehicles, trailers, and a number of other things. Within that total is made up of registration fees from combustion engine passenger motor vehicles are $2,650 per year. As you know, there's an additional $100 for registration fee for electric vehicles for a total of $126.50. That was included as part of the Improve Act in 2017. Electric vehicle fee collections totaled just under $900,000 in FY21. That compares to $585,000 the year before and $443,000 in FY19. There is no additional registration fee for hybrid vehicles, though. They pay the $26.50 standard registration fee. Some quick numbers on how many electric vehicles there are. As you can see from FY20, that would be a snapshot June 30 of 2020, there were 6,400. 18 months later, our most recent number from the end of 2021, that number had grown to 12,000 electric vehicles. Moving on to fuel taxes, I think the committee's well aware of the rates that have gone up over the last, gone up from between 2017 and 2019 from the Improve Act. Gasoline tax since July 1 of 2019 is 26 cents per gallon, and diesel tax is 27 cents per gallon. There is a special petroleum tax on all petroleum products of 1 cent per gallon and an environmental assurance fee of 0.4 cents per gallon on top of the standard rates. This slide is just a distribution of where that revenue is allocated. The 26 cent per gallon gasoline tax is roughly 60 cents, 60% to the highway fund, 25% to the counties, almost 13% to cities, and 1.4% to the general fund. Similarly, it's a slightly different mix for diesel tax, 73% to the highway fund, about 17.5% to counties, 8.7% to cities, and 0.8% to the general fund. The electric vehicle registration fee, that extra $100, goes exclusively to the highway fund. And what does that mean in terms of annual fuel tax collections? We included FY19, 20, and 21. Of course, FY19 was the final year of the, FY19, the year ending June 30 of 19, would have been the next to last year of Improve Act revenue rate increases, and then FY20 would have been the last year of Improve Act rate increases. Despite those rate increases, you can see in the gasoline tax revenue the growth in FY19 from the rate increase. In FY20, collections were down 1% despite the rate increase. That's obviously a COVID pandemic impact from the reduction in miles traveled for that year. In FY21, we rebounded in terms of some of the travel, but generally flat. There was not a large increase from 20 to 21. The picture's a little different for motor fuel taxes, the diesel taxes. You can see clearly in FY19 and FY20 the growth from the rate increases and then leveling off in FY21. To sort of put that into a line chart and look back from FY93 through FY21, you can see some growth, but relatively modest growth in periods of sort of flat growth from 93 through FY17, and then the sharp increase due to the Improve Act rate increases. As you see that sharp increase from FY17 through 20, and then you can see it starting to flatten again as those increases have fully gone into effect. And Mr. Chairman, that's our presentation. I know we're holding questions till later, but we look forward to answering any questions we can for the committee.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate lots of questions from me, but we'll wait till the very end. But thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you, Mr.
Next up on our list today, we do have our new interim commissioner, Mr. Joe Galbato, Preston Elliott, Deputy Commissioner, and I saw Paul Deggs in the back. He's there to set anybody straight if they don't see. So, anyways, thank you, gentlemen, for coming. If you will, just introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Joe Galbato, Interim Commissioner and Chief Financial Officer. And again, to my left is Preston Elliott, our Deputy Commissioner and Head of Planning and Environment. So we want to talk to you a little bit about TDOT's perspective of the electric fees. I'll talk about the past and present, and Preston will talk a little bit about the future and how it's impacted by the IIJA. We concur with the numbers that Revenue just put up, about 6,400 vehicles at the end of 20, 9,100 at the end of fiscal 21, and then about 12,000 vehicles today. Just want to put that in perspective. That represents about 0.2% of the entire Tennessee fleet. So it's very small at this point, but as we said in the governor's hearing, we'd be silly to think it's not going to expand. We looked at something from the University of Tennessee. We found this very interesting. So Tennessee's electric vehicles as a proportion of total vehicles electric in the United States were less than 1%. The vast majority, about 60%, come out of Texas, Florida, California, and the state of Washington. So we're far behind. UT also did a study back in January of 2020 looking at the impact on the revenue side. And it wasn't going to be until about 2025, 2026 that we'd see any what we would call a significant impact, somewhere around $40 million. Chairman, in your district, that would be 2.3 miles on State Road 136. So just to put that in perspective. Right now, so how are states trying to address this? Well, they're doing a lot what the state of Tennessee did. They're looking at a specific fee for the electric vehicles for a vehicle registration fee. Others are looking at pilot projects for vehicle miles traveled, trying to charge based on that. But again, those are still pilots at this point. I think with that, I will turn it back over to Preston and go from there.
Preston Elliott, Chief of Environment and Planning. What I'd like to share is a little bit of what you heard from TDEC. It's been a great partnership that we've had since 2016 on the topic of alternative fuels. Our role in this space has largely to do with some of the federal funds that we have available and the designation of certain routes so that they can be eligible for federal funds. We also are involved as it relates to our metropolitan planning organizations and so forth as they do planning across the state as well. So in 2016, we started the process of identifying, planning, and designating corridors to meet the national designation of an alternative fuel corridor. Our first corridor was identified in 2016, was the I-40 corridor. We are not only looking at electric vehicles, but we are also looking at five different fuel types. Those include compressed natural gas, propane, liquefied natural gas, hydrogen, as well as electric. So it's a whole gamut of alternative fuels. In 2019, we began a process with bordering states of North Carolina as well as the state of Arkansas for the I-40 corridor and undertook a I-40 alternative fuels deployment plan. So working with neighboring states, because one of the issues on electrification is the range anxiety. So there's a process of going through on designation of corridors, which has to do with the various fueling types. Having fuel options every 50 miles, no more than 5 miles from the corridor. To date, we have numerous corridors that are identified across the state, largely pending as we fill in those gaps. Some of the slides that you saw earlier from TDEC showed kind of the placement of some of the fast charging. Once we have those, then they can get to a status of called corridor ready. So we're working towards that effort. In the infrastructure bill, the IIJA, there's $88 million that are available for federal funds for the state of Tennessee for EV charging. And then there's an additional discretionary program that allows for some of the other fuel types that I've mentioned. As you've heard earlier, this has been a pretty collaborative effort. And as Commissioner Galbato has mentioned, numerous states have looked at user fee options, everything from the electric fee that we have on tags to fees and so forth that relate to hybrid vehicles, not just electric, and as well as cents that go on electric components, the actual charge itself. And then the infrastructure bill also includes a national initiative looking at user-based fee study, and that is to take place at a national level.
So with that, I guess we'll turn it over to everyone for questions.
Okay, gentlemen, if you want to stay there, you can. Commissioner Jaragano, if you want to come up and grab a seat too, and Ms. Vasquez, if you want to come up. I think the members have some questions, but while they're coming, I thought I would ask you a question as it related to the fast charging network. Currently, I think the federal funds the TDOT received in the last infrastructure bill, I think it was $88 million for a fast charging network. What have those funds been completely consumed so far, or?
Yeah.
Or
yes.
where are we on the expenditure of those funds, and what
yes,
the purpose for them?
Preston Elliott, Chief of Environment and Planning, TDOT. Sir, those funds in the infrastructure bill, because it's a continuing resolution at this moment, so new programs that are identified in the infrastructure bill are not available for us to begin to expend. So there are several programs that have not been yet put into the system, and that would be one of them.
So other than not getting the money, were there any other stipulations that they had? Would that be an impediment if they were to lift the CR and then actually fund it, or
so that in the last 2 months they have done three what are called requests for information, 2 of which pertain to electric charging. One has to do with a provision that has been the largest holdback for all states utilizing federal transportation funds for EV investments, and that's the Buy America provisions. No state can meet that standard because currently there are no charging devices that meet the Buy America provision requirements. So that was the first request for information. The second was on the $88 million in the discretionary program. The U.S. DOT also put out a request for information to other types of questions that relate to everything from Buy America to funding mechanisms to use of right-of-way. All of these are kind of impediments for utilizing the federal transportation funds.
Okay, thank you. I have a list of members who had questions. First is Leader Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your testimony. My question is regarding the Improve Act, and I believe there were 900 transportation projects that were paid from these funds, and I've got 3 questions as it relates to that. How confident is TDOT in the completion of these 900 transportation projects that were under the Improve Act? And then how has inflation impacted this goal and the transportation funding in general? And then finally, considering inflation is likely to continue to pose funding challenges in the future, are there any recommendations for a long-term solution? So I know that was a lot, and I'll let you all digest all of those.
Let me see if I could address that. As far as the 900 projects for the Improve Act, we testified in front of the governor earlier that those projects, when we initially put them together, excuse me, we had anticipated that being a 10 to 15-year program. But we needed $500 million to do that. And as you're aware, that the legislation that was passed called for $240 million at full phase-in, and there was no indexing. So what our calculation shows is that from 10 to 15 years, we're probably looking at 20 to 25 years. Now, that being said, with the IEIJA being passed, that's going to provide another $200 million a year, roughly, in core programs, the NH programs and the SDBG programs. That, along with the money that the governor has put forth here, should allow us to address more of our Improve Act projects quicker. So, sir, I can't tell you specifically, but I think that 20 to 25 year time frame will gravitate more toward 20 years, and that's what our hope is. At this point, as far as electric vehicles, there really is no significant impact to my revenue today. But as I said, in fiscal 25, the University of Tennessee thinks it will be somewhere around $40 million, which is impactful. It's not going to blow us out of the water, but it will get progressively worse from there. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Thank you. Next on my list, I have Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thanks to all of you for being here. As we look out and try to get our crystal balls in order about how we're going to fund various things in the state. Obviously, this has the potential, I guess, again, it's a question of when, not if, this is going to really begin to impact particularly TDOT and road funding. So you just spoke to this, but if I can get a better idea, I've seen some numbers from various sources about the projections. We're agreed on how many of these hybrid and electric vehicles we have now. That's good. But there seems to be some discrepancy in projections. So if you all could just help me understand, again, those numbers looking out like a 2030, what you would expect those numbers to be. Because I think TDOT had one, TASRA had another, maybe TVA had something a little bit different.
Yeah, I believe you've got about 200,000 vehicles. Is that what you've got? I think with the stuff that you guys have projected as far as the extra money, I think they're talking about, instead of today being somewhere around 12,000 purely electric vehicles, we'd be talking about 200,000 purely.
Again, by 2030
by 2030.
Okay.
By 2028, yes, by 2028, the EV population at 200,000 vehicles.
All right, and is that, does that include semi-trucks? Because I know there's a large trucking industry in my area, and a couple of those companies have made, statements that they're going to be moving to alternate fuels, hydrogen, electric, whatever. So does that include the trucks as well as the personal vehicles?
Correct. That estimate would include all of that.
Okay, thank you. And I guess maybe one of the holes that we didn't plug when we were looking at the Improve Act, we let our hybrid drivers kind of get a pass as they are paying the same as gas vehicles, but they have the electric components. So maybe this is a question for our revenue folks, but have we looked at what the impact would be on if we were to do some kind of hybrid charge for those vehicles? Like we charge $100 for an EV. If we charge 25 or 50 or something additional for a hybrid, do we have any kind of numbers? And are hybrids here to stay, or are they something that, as we move to these alternative fuels, do you see those just kind of disappearing from the scene?
Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood. David Jerrigan with Revenue. I don't know that Revenue is probably the best department to forecast the future on how many hybrids there'll be. Probably one of these other agencies could do a better job of that. But we do count about 87,000 hybrid vehicles currently. Obviously, if the full 100 was applied to that, that'd be 8.7 million, and you could half of that if it was half, or et cetera. But that I think is what we would be looking at as far as the impact of the current hybrid vehicles on the road.
Ms. Vasquez, have you all looked at the hybrid and whether you expect those numbers to continue to grow or to be smaller based on what companies are saying they're going to produce?
Sure. So we know that hybridization of vehicles, particularly in the medium and large vehicle segments, might still continue to occur just because the electric sectors tend to, at least at this point, focus on smaller vehicles. In terms of future outlooks on that, we haven't performed any official studies, but it is our expectation that electrification specifically will become a larger and larger part of the light-duty vehicle segment. Hybridization being kind of a middle ground between that and a pure gasoline or diesel vehicle. So I do think that hybrids will continue to grow, but they will not probably grow as quickly as electric vehicles, is just speculation at this point. We do also work with the Tennessee Clean Fuels coalitions. Middle-West Tennessee Clean Fuels is housed within the Department of Environment and Conservation. And in that work, we do all sorts of promotion and advocacy for alternative fuels of all kinds, including compressed natural gas, propane, electric vehicles, biofuels, things like that. In the trucking industries and kind of medium and heavy-duty markets, we see, again, electrification being a larger component of transit buses in the state. All 4 of the major transit agencies have made current investments or future investments in electric transit buses. We also do have Tennessee's first electric school bus in Washington County, with a lot of other districts interested in pursuing potential federal funds under the IIJA. So we are seeing electrification in those other market segments, but it's certainly not going to grow as quickly as it does in the light duty segment. And I think for trucking and freight in particular, it might be a longer holdout until electric becomes as highly penetrated as the other markets. We might see more in terms of compressed natural gas growth in certain areas, particularly waste hauling, which is already a very popular fuel type for that in Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just note for the record that CARTA in Chattanooga had the first all-electric bus fleet, just so you all know.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Just as a follow-up to, you referenced the UT study. Our staff did some research as it relates to the UT study. I guess the question about the number of vehicle drivers they had, did they include hybrid or in that study? Do you know, or do any of you know? And if, as it relates to electric vehicles, did they take into consideration the 4 OEM manufacturers who are made billions? I think Ms. Vasquez said it was 20, or someone said $20 billion in investments over the last several years.
Yeah, the UT study I'm looking at, again, was a chairman from January of 20, and it was purely electric vehicles, the impact there. So that's all what they were looking at in the analysis we reviewed. Okay,
and not final question, but question from me as a follow-up. Commissioner Geragano, you were here when we did pass the Improve Act. I guess the question, was there ever any discussion about of a different fee for hybrids? The only reason I ask that is, they're a vast majority of the vehicles that we now see that are impacting the roads. Was there ever considered? I don't remember one. I was here. I don't remember a differentiation between the two. Was that ever in the discussion, or was it always just electric vehicle?
Yeah, and Justin may be able to help with my memory. I mean, there were many ideas floated. We pulled lots and lots of numbers. I don't specifically remember a lot of discussion about hybrids, particularly once it sort of was presented. But so I'm kind of with you. I don't have a memory of a lot of discussion about hybrids, but Justin may.
Chairman, I don't really recall any at the time. Now I can tell you, since it passed, we'll get questions from time to time. What about hybrids? But I don't remember it being a major part of the discussion at the time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next on the list, I have Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Really just more of a curiosity question. Is how do we, and if you guys have covered this in your presentation, please forgive me, how do we account for out-of-state electric vehicle drivers 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now in our planning, because we are such a destination state? I mean, during the pandemic, one of the 5 most visited states, only non-beach state. So we have such significant regional travel here for vacation. So how do we, in terms of our revenue for gas tax, diesel projections, how do we account for that in the years ahead if we're going to have this significant, and I guess in some states it's well beyond what ours is, how do we account for the significant increase in electric vehicles as they travel our state and then they're not paying into the gas tax or diesel tax? Not everybody at once.
Yeah. I'll go first. I'm afraid I may state the obvious, but clearly the $100 electric vehicle registration that makes up for the reduction in gas tax as electric vehicles are registered doesn't account for any out-of-state visitors who would otherwise would have been buying gas. So, again, stating the obvious, but there's nothing built into that measure that would account for folks just traveling through. That would only be our Tennessee registrants. As far as estimating the impact of that going forward, Department of Revenue's not done any particular study. I think that's something we could attempt to do, but we've not done to date.
I don't think I'd have much to add other than the fact that when they when they do charge up at the state, if there's a fee, it would be collected here. But until Preston's folks have a charging network across the state, it's going to be few and far between. That would be my guess.
Representative, sorry. I'm going to say something that's risky, but I'll have someone correct me if I'm wrong here. But there was a question about fleet vehicles. So not addressing passenger motor vehicles, but earlier a question about semis that are traveling. If more and more states begin to adopt electric vehicle registration fees, and those were applied to those vehicles as well, I believe we would be able to capture some of those as part of like the multi-state agreement, the international registration plan. But I don't know if we've fully fully explored that yet. So there might be something that's a little bit more built in for those types of vehicles that's not for passenger, but we can definitely look at that.
Chairman Zachary.
Quick follow-up, thank you. So do you know of any other states that have taken any proactive steps that have a larger maybe influx in the Northeast or wherever the largest wherever the most densely populated area of electric vehicles are? Do you know of any other states that have taken steps to address out-of-state electric vehicle drivers or discussions or think tanks? Because again, we're in 2022 and we're talking about 2025. And government moves just a little bit slower than the private sector, and that's not criticism, it's just the reality. So that those 3-4 years will be here before we know it. And I feel like those discussions are paramount for Tennesseans and the quality of our roads. So I'm just curious if you've seen any of that, if we know of any states that have, whether it's California that we don't agree with on anything, just if they've done any, or Florida or anybody that have taken those steps.
I have a life vest for you there.
Well, I was going to say that there are states that are looking at user-based fees, but I don't know about the out-of-state travel. Oregon is an example of a location, a state that has user-based fees based on vehicle miles traveled. I think the national initiative that's part of the infrastructure bill is to address those questions because one state can achieve it having a user-based fee if you can go from one state to the next. It's kind of it creates inequities. So that's what the national initiative is in the infrastructure bill.
As a follow-up, Constantine, my intern, and Chair Lady Hazelwood Sherry did some research regarding this. Most people the only way really to capture out-of-state fees is through some kind of KW charge as it relates to utilities. That's really the only way to do it, which is, when we're talking about a fast charging network, getting that data off of a smart meter or meter is about the only way you can do it. Any other way, Leader Garrett just had to step out for a minute, but he and the former Representative Carter worked really hard to get rid of emissions. It was one of the only few places where you actually had to go in and take your car somewhere. So now that we've gotten rid of that, it's really the only place, unless you were to do something at a clerk's office where people had to do odometer readings. And I know the clerks would love that additional responsibility. But I think those are the only areas which our staff researched that they could do that. So I think some kind of utility charge may be the only way to go forward there. Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all again for being here. Most of our discussion so far has been kind of looking ahead, but I want to back up for just a second and talk about, of course, over the past several years, of course, our newer vehicles, they're much more fuel efficient. So I guess what has that done? Because, of course, we're getting more miles to the gallon now. So what does that look like right now as far as tax collections, as far as gas tax collections?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Hicks. I think it means relatively flat growth, and I think it has. If you look at that line chart, it's relatively flat, and then it just basically shifts up with the rate increases, and then it's going to become relatively flat again. Of course, we have increases in population, more drivers, but that's offset by more fuel efficiency. And I think that's what we've seen in the past, and I think that's what we'll see going forward would be what we would anticipate. But I would defer if the Commissioner has a different outlook.
No, we would also agree that it will start to flat down at this point. So what we got in fiscal 2020 versus 21 was essentially flat. It's going to go up a little bit in fiscal 22 right now, but it's going to flatten out. Just so everyone is aware, so the analysis we did an average car gets about 13,500 miles per year. The average miles per gallon is about 21. So that would correlate on the state side and the federal side to the $300 a year that you keep hearing us talk about. I myself actually drive a gas-powered hybrid. My average miles per gallon is somewhere around 38. So roughly, I'm probably paying only about $150 per year. So again, they're not prevalent throughout the state at this point. Again, total purely electric with the hybrids is only about 1.3%. So it's not a big drain, but as it increases in popularity and usage, it will go down, and that's why we think things will flatten out somewhat.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Electric vehicle tax collections are dedicated entirely to the highway fund, as I understand it. How will more use of electric vehicles affect the cities and counties portion of the fuel tax?
So as far as the vehicle registration fee, that comes to TDOT. There's no split. In the Improve Act, part of the increases in the rates of gas and diesel go to the cities and counties, but none of that electric fee goes to the cities and counties that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. Very interesting conversation. I want to kind of wade out in the weeds for a moment. I'm thinking ahead. Hybrid, electric, the weight of these vehicles, will there be a lot of difference in the weight of these vehicles compared to diesel and gas burners? And I ask that question because I wonder if any consideration's been given to how this is going to affect road maintenance, and it should affect it in a positive way. Can somebody talk about that?
I cannot speak to the size and weight.
Sure. So the curbside weight of electric vehicles, smaller vehicles, do tend to be slightly heavier than their gasoline and diesel counterparts, and that's because of the weight of the battery system. In terms of that's impact on road wear, I think studies that I'm familiar with show that it's not very consequential at this point, particularly because a lot of road wear is more attributed to the freight traffic and those larger vehicles. But the curbside weight of an electric vehicle tends to be slightly heavier than gasoline or diesel of a comparable size.
That is also one of the reasons that you see less movement on, like, let's say, semi-trucks. Because of electric, the weight is a barrier, and they're looking to other fuel sources, whether we're talking about, compressed natural gas. UPS is probably a great example of where you see an alternative fuel other than electric for that exact reason, because of the weight.
Thank you. I asked that question because just recently bought a new truck myself, and it's not steel. I thought it was, but it's not. It's something else. And so I'm thinking that new vehicles would be lighter than older vehicles. I guess maybe I'm looking wrong. I don't know.
I think from the engineering perspective, and Paul's here if he wanted to come up and opine, but the damage to the roads are the guys over 80,000 pounds. So the overweight, overdimensional, that's where the wear and tear on the roads comes. Basic cars and trucks really don't impact the roads that much.
Thank you. I guess the only question is, if we have, to the representative's question, if we do have tractor trailers that are fitted with electric or with batteries, it's obviously our roads are designed for a capacity based upon weight, and if they're exponentially heavier than what a traditional tractor trailer would that cause us to have to redesign our roads for a heavier weight based upon a load, or will they just have to reduce the weight of the load? I know we got into this with logging years ago, so it was a little bit of a challenge, but do either of you can speak to that or no?
I would defer to Paul if you don't mind him coming up to speak, please.
Graduate of Tennessee Tech, Paul Diggs, if you will, introduce yourself.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I guess Representative Shaw, your question about the weights. So, if a current state and federal law speaks to the axle weight of vehicles, so regardless of the weight of a vehicle is in the battery or in its freight, under current law, it's based on that axle weight. So, if the vehicle fleet changes to where the vehicle itself becomes a larger percentage of the load, then they will have less freight carrying capacity, and that would drive additional trucks on the road. And when we design highways, it's based on equivalent single axle loads. So while the road wouldn't be damaged more, it would wear out faster. So it's an exponential increase if you go above that 80,000 pound load. For a 10% increase in load, you're going to get about a 40% increase in damage. So, but if you keep the load the same, you're going to end up putting more trucks on the road, and it will wear the roads out faster.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't have anyone on the list, but I have two more questions, and then we'll land the plane. Commissioner Giorgano, you spoke earlier, and you showed me this graph that showed the revenue collections last couple of years because of COVID, a reduction, then returning to flat. If we see the current trend, do you project it's going to be flat for the next several years, or do you think that the onset of all these vehicles in 2025 is going to cause a steep reduction? I guess my concern is it's really hard to change trajectory once you're without a parachute. And so I guess the question is, the purpose of this hearing really is to try to find a mechanism or a way by which to replace funding that we're anticipating losing. And so my thought is how much time do we have? I mean, based upon your best guess, obviously.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just sitting there thinking, I may have overstated flat. I was talking sort of relative to the increase we saw with the rate increases. We do think it will flatten out, but we've projected growth over just for the next 2 years. I mean, not a long term, but a shorter term look. These are just internal projections that drove our presentation to the funding board. Okay, that's all these are. But for gasoline tax for FY22 over FY21 is a 5% increase, which is pretty healthy. But that's because FY21 was affected, by COVID. And then looking out to FY23, a 1% year-over-year increase. For diesel tax, the FY22 estimate is a 2.4% increase, and then getting a little flatter in FY23 at 1.8%. So those are our internal projections that we're looking at. So relatively flat, but there is growth, but that's just 2 years.
Thank you. Ms. Vasquez, the final question was, do you, based upon, and you may not know the answer to this, but my perception of the reason why people took up hybrids is there were concern over the quality and longevity and life, really, of batteries, and so it was kind of a way to get your toe wet. I guess the question is do you think that hybrids are going to go away and be replaced because battery technology is so much better now and we're manufacturing them here? Or do you think this divergence between the two is going to continue at the same track, or do you know?
Sure. It's going to be a little bit of speculation on my part, but just to make sure that we're clear about the different technologies available. We have the all-electric EVs, which is, of course, the types of vehicles that are subject to the registration fee right now. We have plug-in hybrids, which do have onboard batteries, so they can use those for a portion of a trip to cover as electric. So they can plug in, but they do also have gasoline backups. So you could have both of them operating at the same time, just on gas. You have flexibility there. And then we have standard hybrid vehicles, the most popular one being the Toyota Prius, which runs solely on gasoline. You can't plug it in, but there's obviously an onboard battery that can take over regenerative braking, all sorts of different ways to recapture energy and use it to make your drive more efficient. Plug-in hybrids, that one in the middle, we did see that being a very prevalent technology early on in the electrification space because, like you said, it's a great way of dipping your toe in. You still have the gasoline backup, but you get to experience the plugging in and having an all-electric option for most of your daily commutes. We see that technology not growing very much in the future. A lot of the manufacturers that were investing in that, particularly GM, which had the most popular plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the Chevy Volt, stopped manufacturing that vehicle because they were more invested in going all electric. They kind of used the plug-in hybrid option as a proving ground for battery technologies in general for the light-duty segment. Plug-in hybrids in general, they are more prolific in terms of the number of manufacturers that produce them, but they are not very prolific in terms of actual sales. Most of the sales in the EV space are still going to the all-electric faction, and that's probably what's going to continue to happen in the future. In terms of just the regular hybrids, no plug-in option, but there is a battery. That one's a little bit tougher to say. It certainly depends on the uptake of electrification as an option. And I think a lot of that is going to be determined by the ability for the vehicle prices to come down so that they become more equitable from that standpoint, as well as for the electric vehicles to grow up in certain terms of scale. So trucking, SUVs, we're seeing that those options are becoming available, including the Ford Lightning, all-electric F-150, and the Volkswagen ID4, which is a small SUV produced out of Chattanooga. There's definitely, I guess this is all to say, it's a little bit of a crapshoot right now. I think that we will continue to see hybrids for the next few years, and it's really going to depend on the success of electrification in the short term in terms of what hybrid option looks like in the long term.
Thank you. Do the members have any further questions? Seeing none, thank you guys for your testimony today. Really appreciate you coming. To the members, obviously this committee was, the purpose was to have a hearing, to have a discussion on this. I think one of the things that we find out here is that there's no one panacea, that any way we're going to try to figure out how to get Tennesseans to pay their fair share or equitable tax in order to maintain our roads is going to be a combination of a lot of solutions. And so I look forward to working with you guys as we talk about it in the future. As a reminder, on Thursday next week, we're going to talk about sales tax revenue as well. So you'll get another white paper from my office so that you'll be ready to answer questions next week. Do the members have any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move to adjourn. Good job. 10-10.